Welcome to our compliance conversation in the midst of COVID-19, hosted by ILSA Inc. and Spot On Insurance. Today we'll be covering forgotten compliance,
Yikes.
affiliations, name and address changes, and unlicensed cancellations.
Thank you to everyone that has joined. We have quite a nice crowd. Right now, your mics are muted. Later on at the end of the session, we will allow you guys to join the conversations and we'll unmute the mics. If you guys have any questions, any compliance questions, you can put them on the Q&As section. And if you just want to say hi, just put that in the chat section. So at the bottom of your screens, if you have a computer in front of you, you'll see there's a chat icon and you'll see there's a question and answer icon. And we're going to be having our chat manager, which is Kelsey Kilpatric, take care of all of those questions that are coming in. So just get those questions coming in.
So our guest panelists today are Jeff Baughman, Producer Licensing and Oversight Program Manager from the Washington State Office of the Insurance Commissioner.
Welcome, Jeff.
Joanne Delgado, Vice President Education and Compliance from the Surplus Lines Associations of California. Welcome.
We'll try not to say anything bad about California today.
And our ILSA panelists are Russ Foster, the General Manager at ILSA, Kristy Roberts, who's the Licensing and Compliance Manager. Where's that? Where's me? And Stefanie Cantu, Supervisor of the Licensing and Compliance Department. Of course, Arleen already introduced Kelsey Kilpatric, who's going to do our chat manager for today.
How are you doing, Kelsey?
I'm good. How are you?
Good deal. So one of the things that we've done in the past is we've addressed all of the COVID-19 regulatory bulletins that come in. You know, they're constantly coming in. It's slowed down a little bit, but Russ, if you will share with us on our ILSA newsroom where they can be found.
We have all of this information on our corporate website, ilsainc.com. Our folks do a great job of rounding up all the current state bulletins, making sure that we have information on there sometimes before it makes it onto the state website. And so in honor of Jeff here, I'll show you how we can find information by state. You can find it by tags down here. You can find it by the departments. We have it set up to make it as easy as possible. So if we just wanted to see what's going on in Washington State, we hit go. Our most current one is from May the 21st. So you can do it by the state that you're in or the state that you want to find out about. Or again, we have the tags on the sides. If you want something besides the state bulletins, which has got the most current information, you can also look at our contact page, which is under resources. And we have direct links to all of the states and all of the resources that are available in the state. So if we click on Washington again, you can get to the Department of Insurance, Department of Revenue, Secretary of State. You notice they've got licensee searches and business entity searches. Those will link you directly to those features on their website. So all kinds of handy tools. These are out there for folks in the industry, so you don't have to search state by state. You can just come to ILSA and all that stuff is presented there for you.
Thank you, Russ. Two other great resources that our team has found very helpful are the WSIA website. So you can go to wsia.org and the AICPA.org website if you're looking for things having to do with the Departments of Revenue and whatnot. So Kristy, today I'm so excited to be covering these topics. We are going to be talking about the compliance tasks that are often overlooked. And so let's just jump right into it, into affiliations, name and address changes, and license cancellations.
All right, so the most commonly forgotten compliance tasks that while they may be thought of whenever an agency is doing business, when they get busy, tend to forget, hire on new employees, they tend to forget to do the affiliations. especially the larger agencies that come on board with us, they might have their designated producer licensed and affiliated or designated as their responsible producer, and that's fine, that's great. What they tend to forget is adding those affiliated producers or those producers that are just transacting business for them into the state system as affiliated producers. And now we know from previous podcasts and webinars that there's about 24, 25 states that require an affiliation. That means that it's not optional. That means that you got to do it. It's not a hard process, but when you're looking at, 30, 45 agents licensed in all 50 states, that can get time consuming and tedious, but it's a requirement, so it's got to be done. On that same note, when you have producers that leave your agency, you have to terminate those. Those states that require affiliations also require terminations. Some states will issue a penalty. Alaska will, if you're within a certain window of that producer being terminated, they'll fine you based off of the time frame that you're reporting your termination. So it's important to do both of those affiliations and terminations accordingly. It's important for you to keep a chart of the states that require those so you stay in compliance. So I do have a question for Jeff. Why does the Departments of Insurance need that information, and what do you do as a regulator with that information?
I believe your question, Kristy, was in regard to why do the states need the information off of affiliations, and what was the second part of that?
What do you do with that information as a regulator?
Well, in the states that require affiliations, it gives us an idea of what licensed producers are actually operating under the business name, because in our state, the affiliations require the agency to be appointed, but not the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So we're tracking who is doing what placement of business through what appointment by tracking the affiliations to the agency. So that's really what we do with it. I mean, it's a compliance thing, it's a market conduct thing, it's an investigations thing. If we want to see that the folks who are representing the entity are actually affiliated to that entity.
So do you guys issue administrative actions for failure to process the affiliations or terminations if you find out about it maybe after the fact?
Normally the answer would be yes. In a compliance world, we try and get the agencies back into compliance by making sure all their affiliates, if they've not done so and something has cropped up either through market conduct, through a complaint to investigations, or through one of our compliance projects we've done to find out everybody's not affiliated, we try and get them to be affiliated as soon as possible. Recently, we had 400 administrative actions taken against agencies across the U.S. because they didn't have at least one affiliate for a licensed agency. And that was after 4 different communications with those licensees with no response from any of them. So we didn't really have any recourse, but 400 administrative actions went out.
All right, and you and I talked yesterday a little bit about the repercussions. What was the snowball effect from that?
Believe it or not, we've had a number of those agencies that have now requested a hearing to try and clear their name, so to speak, of the administrative action, when it's clear in our law that each licensed agency has to have at least one affiliate. That being the DRLP is the primary one that you're supposed to have affiliated, and that's what this project was all about. They didn't have their DRLP affiliated to the agency, and after 4 different compliance requests, including a written one from our legal department, The last 400 just did not come into compliance. We started out with 1,200 agencies not in compliance. So while we whittled it down, a simple thing like going online and filing a $20 affiliation ended up costing them a revocation.
Yep. And what about the address changes?
Yes, one of my favorite compliance topics, address changes along with email. You know, almost every state out there, I'm sure, has a 30-day requirement on change of address. Ours includes your email. Well, the reason that's important is in this online world, that email address becomes your registered address with the department. That's where all the communication regarding your license is going to go. And that is specifically stated in our law. So when you change your email address and don't tell us, the first thing that's going to happen is your renewal notices will not be coming to your email address. Then you either forget to renew your license and now you're in late renewal, or you miss it altogether and now you're in a reinstatement and your license is expired. So it's critical for that email address in this day and age to be continually updated. And we've heard people say, oh, well, that's my email address from like 4 emails ago. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to worry about the 3 in between. All I'm worried about is the one where you are right now. So there's typically a small fine that goes along with that. Change of address can be a little bigger. We rarely send a written notice. Our orders have to go out by a written notice according to our law, but email is our primary source of communication in this world.
I would like to ask Jeff a question back to the affiliations on that revocation. Once you know, all of those folks that weren't in compliance, is there an issue if they place business during that time period where they're revoked?
Absolutely, because we go back from the time frame you were not in compliance until when you get in compliance, and the questions that either our market conduct, our investigators, or my compliance staff actually ask is how much business was placed in Washington during that time by these people who are not affiliated. And that weighs into the administrative action that's taking place.
Oh, the dreaded administrative action. So a little bit back to the address changes. When we have clients come on board, we will often suggest to them to have a distribution list, an email distribution list like licensing@ilsainc.com, and have a couple of people on that distribution list, because if someone leaves, if Mary leaves, she's the only one on that distribution list, then no one's getting those emails. If you have multiple people on that email distribution list, while Jan might not take care of it, she knows if Mary leaves, she's then responsible for checking the emails, making sure that any action items are taken care of. And it's worked out quite well for our clients, not only from a service provider having one email to go to and one distribution list to go to. We're not having to remember the different departments that we have to reach out to. They're then only getting one email instead of a one email sent to 3 or 4 different people. So it's good to have a distribution list that's monitored by several people, so you know things don't fall through the cracks like that.
Great idea.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. All right, so our next topic, address changes from ILSA's perspective. Yeah. So we processed probably 150,000 address changes.
She's not lying.
Maybe exaggeration just a little bit, but we find that address changes, they change their physical address many times. When our clients come into our services, we run that PDB. We see those old address changes and we immediately tell them, you know, you need to make these updates with the states. This is why. And a lot of them, they're working, maybe they've never reported their email address, and we then report that information to them. So we're doing our best to try and make sure that the email address stay up to date. Unfortunately, they're no better at informing us of these changes as they are the DOI. And we do the work for them. They just have to let us know one time, and we'll do the work for them. So yeah, it's a struggle of ours as well.
Another issue that we see people tend to forget to update is the DOIs with their new name. We mostly see it with individuals just because it's, you already know you have to change your name on your driver's license, on your, you know, just different documents. The last thing, or one of the last things you think about is changing your name with the Departments of Insurance. Same thing with addresses, and I hate moving. I don't know how people move so often.
No.
But you know, going through a name change and an address change, like I said, you have to update all these other, you know, your bills, your driver's license, your state documents, right? All these things that by the time you're done with all that, you think, oh, I've got it all, I'm done. Until the states find out that your name has been changed and you didn't notify them. So that's one thing that we notice that some people tend to forget, or they don't realize when they should update the states. They're like, you know, hey, I got married in February, but I didn't change my name right away. You know, I don't plan on changing it till I have more time on my hands, so I'll do that in the summer. At what point do I need to change my name with the DOIs or update them with my name change? It's always, or should always be 30 days within the date you actually changed your name. Not necessarily the date you got married, because I know not everybody changes their last names when they get married. So it's, I know I'm out of compliance.
I tell
Luckily,
her that
I'm not
all the
licensed.
time. Yeah, I tell her that all the time. She's out of compliance.
But yeah, the date that you do go to the courthouse and get all your names changed on your documents is the date, that's when the time starts. You know, you have 30 days from that point to update the DOIs. And there's various ways to do that. There's state forms, there's just an email notice, but just be prepared to provide supporting documents. They want to see a copy of your marriage certificate, your new driver's license, your new social security card. They kind of vary. Most of them are pretty standard and would be okay with just your driver's license. But some states require a little bit more, but that is one thing that we tend to see. You know, we go out there to do a renewal for someone and we're like, oh wait, Jane's name is different on this renewal than it is in our database. Like, what happened? And so it just kind of goes from there. But that's another thing that people tend to forget, that they need to update the states.
Most definitely. So I always pick on Ted when I do these webinars, but now I'm going to pick on Stefanie. She's been married since 1905, and she's yet to change her name. We're going on what? How many years? 3 years now?
Who knows? Let's change the subject.
Do you guys actually know that in Latin America, women do not change their name when they get married? So when I moved to Puerto Rico, and I meet all these couples, and I was like, oh wow, none of these couples are married, but they were.
Not only that, then they have 10 names behind that first one.
Yeah.
And in Puerto Rico, so it's Maria, Estefa, blah, 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 this, and then they want all those names. At least three names across.
So Joanne, you know, you have the interesting perspective from having been at a carrier that had lots and lots of agencies. Now you're at a regulatory body. Wilma is in the house.
Wilma, welcome.
She used to be formerly with the Puerto Rico Department of Insurance, or the Insurance Commissioner. Welcome, Wilma.
Hi, Wilma.
Joanne, I would love to get your perspective on what it was like managing a big group at an agency, getting that feedback from the agents. What was it that would cause them not to report in their address changes, like they moved their homes? What would be the reasons that you would find out, oh my gosh, we have an administrative action because this person never told us, you know, about this?
I would say essentially people don't remember or realize that everything about their license is important to the state. And it, you know, like it's the separation between having that license and knowing the commitment that you made when you took it. And so you have a responsibility to the state. Many times the stories, so I had about 1,000 brokers under the agency that I managed, and we were constantly chasing them down. And in some cases, finding out that brokers actually moved out of the country and really could no longer hold a surplus line or any other type of US license. So it really becomes a disconnect between the purpose for getting the license and what the, I'm going to say the responsibilities associated to having the license.
And I think this is going to be an issue that's going to be arising even more so due to COVID-19, because now people are finding, hey, I don't have to go into my office building anymore. And people are actually making decisions to move overseas. I have all of this flexibility. I can actually live overseas and work for my company. So that's going to be interesting how the states start dealing with that, right? Because that's going to be interesting. Now, what's going to be the resident state? Is it going to be where that company has, was primarily located? More and more insurers, agencies are saying, we're not going to have a physical home office.
Right. But your brokers need to be resident in the state in which they're licensed. You can only have one resident state.
Right.
So the out of the country move, and again, I had a couple of them that, thank goodness, we found them quickly before a lot of business was being written, and we could fix that situation. But from a compliance perspective, that is a full-time job, is watching those brokers in the field, and it's not something to be taken lightly, because the repercussions are huge. The other thing that I would just bring up, sort of related but not, is that not only do you need to keep the DOI up to date on your name changes, your license changes, and any other status changes, but you need to similarly make sure that you're doing that with your state SLAs. So not every stamping office or surplus line association has all of those name change, address change, email address change access that the CDI has on their website. So in most cases, just check your local stamping offices wherever you're licensed to make sure that they're either getting that update from the state or have a process in place that allows you to update that easily. So I'm going to say that's something I'm finding now in California, that brokers don't realize they not only have to update us, but they have to update the CDI, and then vice versa.
Kelsey, you are on mute if you're trying to say something.
I realize that, sorry. That's not only for surplus lines, right? That's any line of authority?
That would be any line of authority.
Yes, Tisha asked that. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah, so I think, in surplus lines, it's just an added governmental office that you have to, if you just have PNC, you're just going to report that to the DOI. But if you have PNC and surplus lines, now all of a sudden you have to report that to the DOI and to the SLA. Same thing in Washington, who also has a surplus lines stamping office.
So I have a question. So there is no feed from the DOI to the stamping offices for license updates, information like that, lines of authority, expiration dates, or names whatsoever?
Are you directing that to me?
No, to Joanne.
Oh,
Gotcha.
and I'm sorry. I thought you were directing it to Jeff. So sorry.
Oh, well, one's from the DOI, one's from the Secretary of State. So, stamping office, so you could both answer.
Sure. No, from a stamping office perspective, there are no fees or other repercussions. It's more making sure that we have every way to contact a licensee similar to the DOI's, concern is that when we need to get in touch with you, we need to be able to find you. So having your email address from 3 companies ago can make that challenging.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But
So-
you don't get any feeds, like data feeds from the DOIs letting you know when these things change, correct?
I'm going to say that's something that so in California directly, that is actually something we're working on and making some great progress with, but we're not quite there yet. So,
Good to hear.
In this interim period, we do have a process in place so that the brokers can provide us those updates. But I'm hoping to have some good developments later this year.
That's good.
Nice. So one thing for our attendees to kind of keep in mind, again, if your brokers have surplus lines licenses, it's so crucial, and I'm sure that you must know that there's certain states that don't have a stamping office, a surplus lines association. So you would report that into the insurance department. But for those states that have an SLA, that's an added piece. That's an added reporting piece. And there's probably, I think, 13 states that do have an SLA. Joanne, do you remember?
Yeah, I want to say it might be up to 14 with North Carolina joining in a few years ago.
Okay. So there you have it. So you would have to do those address changes at all the DOIs plus all those SLAs.
And that's for individuals and agencies.
Correct. It is, and it's similar to what we talked about with affiliations. Similarly with the stamping office, when you have the surplus line license and you set up that stamping office account so you can report your filings, in most cases you need to provide a list of contacts and who key people are.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest issues that we find is that information does not get updated. And we may have a broker who's now changed jobs 3 or 4 times, associated to 3 or 4 different agency entities.
Oh, wow.
So it gets that piece gets a little tricky, and it's not necessarily something that we can ultimately get from a CDI perspective. So even as we make that progress and we're getting more data and being able to coordinate that data, the affiliations and the changes within the agency are always important to keep up to date in both places.
Yeah, you speak of that. We have individuals that are affiliated to multiple agencies. So it could be that Pam left Joe Snuffy Insurance Agency and went to another agency, left there and went to another, but she was affiliated to each one of those agencies and they never processed termination. So she's affiliated to 3 or 4 agencies, indefinitely because, it's a forgotten compliance. So.
And depending on the state, the agency is paying for that affiliation potentially every year. So some states bill you for that affiliation on an annual basis, and it's your responsibility to make sure you add and remove the appropriate licensees.
Yes, for sure. New Mexico makes us renew those affiliations. And since you said that, it's also important to terminate their appointments because you pay for that appointment renewal off the carrier's invoice. You could be paying for this producer who's no longer underneath your entity, paying for their renewing the appointment. So that's a forgotten compliance too until you get your invoice and you're like, oh, this person's been gone for 2 years and let me get them off my appointment roster.
And that's why it's so important to have a good process, right? To have that feedback
Yes.
from your HR department that's feeding that information to you, whether it's on a monthly basis, so that you can double check, hey, is this person that just came off of our payroll, are they in a role of a producer? And we can take them off.
Yes, most definitely. And your bigger brokerages, your bigger insurance agencies, they're going to find that disconnect between HR and the individual being terminated, because maybe you have one licensing coordinator who doesn't know Pam, doesn't know Jan, but she knows they need to be affiliated. She doesn't know them in person. When they leave, HR is not going to tell her, hey, Pam and Jan are no longer with us, for them to process the appointment. So it is very important for someone in that role to reach out to HR and tell them, look, let me know who's been terminated or who's been hired, so I can get them properly licensed, affiliated, appointed, and make sure name and address changes stay up to date. They may not do anything with that information aside from what needs to be done at the DOI. Hopefully that wouldn't, because some of the states require Social Security information. So there does need to be a little bit of trust between your HR personnel and your licensing or compliance personnel as well.
Hisha asked another question. It says, is there a master list of states for affiliates?
No. Yes and no. If you
that need affiliates.
We have that information internally because it's stored in our system in our guides, but for a resource that lists all that information, no ma'am, there's not.
Can I interject here just a quick second?
Yes,
Something Joanne said kind of brings me back to the conversation we had about affiliates. If you are affiliated to an agency, that's one thing, but it brings on a whole new level of compliance issues when it's surplus lines. Our surplus lines broker report all of their policy information to the Surplus Lines Association. There's a stamping fee that the Surplus Lines Association retains for all the information and assistance they give there. And we get a feed of that data that comes into our office. However, our communication for payment of taxes on those surplus lines policies goes out to the agencies if you're affiliated. So if you are part of a surplus lines or a surplus lines agency that has 7 affiliates, it is assumed that the agency is paying the tax. If you're not affiliated, we're sending you the bill for placements on your surplus lines license, and that sometimes creates some interesting conversations about who is and who is not affiliated to an agency.
California as well. If you're affiliated, you don't have to file a separate tax return. It's all part of the agency entity return.
Hey, Kristy, before we go on to your next, I think you have license cancellations. Kelsey, can you hit us up with some of the questions that got sent to ccquestions@ilsainc.com?
Yes, but actually, Wilma, is it Wilma or Wyma?
Wilma.
Wilma, okay. She asked, wasn't the NAIC producer working group working on a survey to identify the states that require affiliations?
That is a correct answer.
Okay.
We did put together a list at one point in time. I believe there's at least 28, if not 30 states that do affiliations in some way, shape, or form. And I feel your compliance issues out there in the industry because they're all different.
Yes.
Some states require the agencies to have the affiliations, and everybody's got to be appointed as well.
Mm-hmm.
Our state is one like I think there's 3 others that if you're affiliated to an agency, the individual does not have to have the appointment, the agency does. So, I mean, all the rules are different, and there was a list that was put together by the NAIC regarding the affiliation. Where that information is at, I'm not sure. You could probably email Greg Welker at the NAIC, and he could probably give you that list.
All right, that's very good information, Jeff and Wilma. I didn't realize the NAIC had that that guide out there at all. We do a lot of our own research, our own legwork the hard way. And some of this information, we've had stored in our system. We update it periodically.
Don't say it's been there since 1905.
Yes, it has.
Which is what she loves to say. Very good. So Kelsey, if you will share with us some of the questions that have been sent in.
Absolutely. The first one says, my license renewal usually asks for my address. If I put the new address on my renewal application, why would I have to submit a separate address change?
Good question.
I'll take that one if you
Go
don't mind.
ahead.
Oh, wait. Jeff says he's going to handle it.
Oh,
Go, Jeff.
Oh, yeah.
Well, while some states allow you to report your address change at renewal time, most states have a requirement in their statutes or their regulations stating address changes are required within 30 days of the change. So that's the main reason why. We want to know where our licensees are residing. We want to know when those changes take place, rather than every 2 years you notify us that you're changing an address. So it's statutorily or regulatory requirements.
When I used to be doing licensing a long, long time ago, New Jersey used to have a fine of $10,000 if you missed that deadline. I have no idea if they still have a fine, but that was like $10,000.
We used it in our advertising all the time. It really helped.
Kristy, how bad is New Jersey right now?
I hadn't seen anything come out of New Jersey in that amount in a long time.
Yeah.
Kristy and Stefanie, do you have anything to add about that? The address changes, needing a separate form?
At the renewal time?
No, what he pretty much said what I was going to say. I was just going to add that not all states, which he kind of did say it, give you the option to even edit your address at the time of renewal. A lot of states just verify that there's not a way to change that information. You have to stop that renewal, go fix your address, and then resubmit it, or submit it and then fix your address. But nonetheless, a lot of states don't even give you that option. So like he said, it's best to always notify them within that 30-day window, just to avoid any issues, not just with not reporting it on time, but if they do happen to mail you something or email you something and they get a bounce back, well, that's a big no-no.
Yeah, and we have seen where it triggers an email from the state saying, hey, you've submitted an address change on your renewal. We don't have a record of this. Please tell us when you moved. And then if you've moved 2 years, 3 years ago, they're going to have an issue with that.
Our next question. Sorry, Arleen.
Just to go on that, if you have licenses across the U.S., if you have multiple licenses, your renewals are coming up at different times. So if you didn't report that at your in your home state, and now you're trying to renew your non-resident licenses, that's going to be a nightmare.
Most definitely it will. And what we tend to see is we get ready to do a renewal. Say a client comes in of ours, a client of ours comes in, they haven't reported that address change. We go to do the renewal, we see the issue, and we don't have a time frame to stop that renewal without it lapsing, to change that address at the state and have the state process them. So, we get clients that come in whose license is due to renew tomorrow or the next day. So they really do push that window of opportunity to the very last minute that they can do that address change. I apologize for that phone ringing.
Our next question is, does it matter how long I wait before I report changes of employment to the Department of Insurance?
You can't wait. If you leave a company, if you leave an agency, you're an independent producer, you go to a new agency, a lot of states require that agency to terminate your affiliation. But if you go on there and you find that the agency you left has not terminated your affiliation, you can self-terminate. We have had agents maybe not leave on the best of scenarios. They're upset with their former agency, and they'll find that they haven't been terminated, and they've asked us, can I self-terminate? And that is definitely an option, but it must be made within 30 days. And so if you self-terminate and it's been 6 months, you can have you can be putting that agency in jeopardy, which, you know, it's not your fault. You know, they didn't process the termination like they were supposed to, but a good rule of thumb is 30 days.
Jeff, what have you seen out there, like when agents are moving into a new agency and then they say, well, you know, my previous employer still hasn't terminated us. Is that something that you suggest to them? Hey, you can go ahead and self-terminate your previous employer's relationship?
That's kind of the guidance we provide. You know, if they're moving on to an agency and the old agency has not terminated that affiliation, we can do that. They can self-request that termination take place. All they have to do is notify the agency that they're terminating the affiliation rather than the agency doing it. I get it. I mean, people get busy, people get behind the times, and it's just one of those things where if the agency doesn't get around to it, you have the option. So that's out there for the appointment as well.
Okay, very good. Joanne, by chance, do you know what the process is, let's say from the California Surplus Lines Association's perspective? And I don't know if in your role you would know that, but if you do, share it with us. Like, I mean, what if you change brokerages and that the affiliation hasn't been terminated?
You know, similar. So what I'm not 100% sure of is whether you can self-terminate with the CDI. I do know that the change can be reported. I'm just not sure whether the CDI allows for the self-termination. As we talked about earlier, if there are changes in your affiliation, reporting them to the stamping offices, if you hold that surplus line license, ensures that gives us the opportunity to also follow up with that prior entity. So that's some of the measures that we have in place to kind of help our members, is that if we see that and we can confirm that that termination has not happened, to really help the member by contacting the entity and sending them that reminder that that termination needs to be done.
That's great.
Tisha asked another question that says, just for clarity for the affiliations, what was the pros of keeping good affiliations with a relation to an annual report?
So an affiliation and an annual report is two different things. If I'm taking that correctly, the annual report that you're speaking about goes to the Secretary of State's information, and the affiliation goes to the Departments of Insurance. Is that what you were referencing when you said annual return? No.
Isn't there a type of license that has annual reports with it?
The surplus line license does require an annual filing. So if you hold a surplus line license and are affiliated to an agency, not in every state, but in most states, it avoids having to do a separate return by licensee. Those licensees are all rolled up under that entity license, but it is specific to the surplus line tax return.
It's good always like to clarify, right? Because so much of this terminology, it goes across different areas. Like I know for risk purchasing groups, they have like annual reports that they call it annual reports. So it's always so good for us to get clarity, right?
Yes, for sure. And in this case, you're talking annual report, Secretary of State, annual report, Surplus Lines Association, yes, and annual report at the DOI.
Tish, did we answer your question? Great.
I believe she said yes, we answered it correctly. Or
Kelsey, do we have other questions?
Yes, we have, the next one says the person that acted as our agency's DRLP has left the company. Can we report his affiliation terminations immediately? And also, I'm going to add a note, what is DRLP to the people that may not know what that is?
DRLP is designated responsible licensed producer. Since I've been doing this since 1905, it was just designated producer for me, or DP. The states had to go and change it. That's how it used to be before. But do you want to take this one? Sure. No? Oh, no.
So usually the DLRP is somebody that's an officer of the company or somebody that's been with them for a long time. So hopefully you kind of have an idea of when they are going to leave, so you can prepare to have somebody take their place. If that happens to not be the case, and accidents happen, something goes wrong.
Stefanie, just 1 second.
Yes.
Let's go to a real life nightmare scenario where that we have gotten notice like the day that a designated licensed resident, what is it, DLRP has left, like just walked out. Yes, we've had that scenario. So let's go to the real life scenario.
We see it quite often, unfortunately. But yeah, so if he just decides one day he's just gonna up and leave. As an agency, so the question I think was, how long do they have before they can report that change? Is that what you said, Kelsey?
Can they terminate him immediately?
Yes. Can you report his affiliation terminations immediately?
Okay.
Well, Jeff says yes.
Yes and no.
And no.
Because technically they are no longer there. So as an agency, you don't want to have somebody tied to your license and then they go off and do something. Worst case scenario, get a fine, something happened, it's going to be tied back to your agency because they're still listed as your DP, your DLD, whatever, DP. But at the same time, if you don't have somebody ready to take their place, as in licensed, in some cases, they also have to be an officer. So if you don't have all that ready right away, that's going to leave you in a pickle, because once you go and terminate them as the DP, the states are going to want to know, okay, well, who's taking their place? If you don't have anybody in mind right away, well, then that's a whole nother issue, and it can cause, yeah, you have to get them licensed, and not all states license right away. Some require fingerprints, so it's a long, drawn-out process, and we've seen it. We've seen it happen where agencies call us in a panic, like, our DP's gone, he walked out the door. We don't have anybody to take his place. Like, what do we do? How fast do we need to report this? What are our options? And I mean, you really have to look at the big picture and see, ideally, who do you have in place that could take, their position. Sometimes you have to start from scratch, and you don't have another officer as a backup that is licensed anywhere remotely close to what Bob Joe was. So you have to start from the beginning. But, you do have to report it as quickly as possible, but you also don't want to put your agency in a pickle where they're without a DP, because then you'll start losing your agency licenses. So, even if you think Joe Blow is going to be there with you for the rest of his life, you should still consider having a backup plan, because you just never know. Accidents could happen, relationships can go bad, suddenly somebody needs to move. Just different things can come up that you're not expecting or not thinking, and it's just always best to have a backup plan so you don't find yourself in a situation where you're like, I don't know what to do, because like I said, we see it all the time.
But we constantly also advise our clients of that as well. That's part of the advice that we give, because of, and we've seen it all. What is that commercial where we've seen everything? One of the insurance commercials? Yeah. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two.
And as a service provider, it puts a service provider in a very awkward situation if that DP happens to say, well, I'm now forming a new agency, And you have relationships with the old company and the new company.
Jeff, you got anything to add on this?
Yeah, we've been there, done that. We've heard it all too. For those, I mean, we don't have any requirements as far as when that termination can take place. Our advice is the minute you know your DRLP is leaving and they give notice to the agency, those affiliations can be terminated immediately. And we suggest that for the reasons that that Kristy and Stefanie both mentioned. We don't have requirements in the state of Washington as far as they have to be an officer or director as far as replacing the DRLP, but we do have in our regulations some guidelines about the person has to be in a position of influence and have access to the information to guide compliance throughout the agency. So it just can't be your newly licensed administrative assistant at the front desk is now your DRLP. Yeah, we call those throwaway DRLPs because that's the first person that gets blamed when something goes wrong, and we don't allow that anymore. So they have to be in a position of influence in order to be the DRLP, but not necessarily an officer and director in this state.
Yeah, the worst case scenario was we had a client that was what we like to call mom and pop. It was the gentleman formed his company. He was the sole producer. He was the sole officer, not the sole producer, but he was the sole designated producer. He had a couple of employees, but he had a heart attack and passed away. So in that case, those licenses for his licenses can no longer be used as the responsible producer licenses. So we reached out to the departments of insurance. We told them, you know, unfortunately he passed away. Will you please give us more time to get these producers licensed or this replacement producer license? You have to do that anytime you're dealing with a resident of Florida as well, because it takes so darn long to get the license application processed. But most of the states, as long as you communicate with them, they will allow you to go a little over a 30-day or even a 60-day time frame. But it's important that that communication comes from you and not the DOI finding out about it later, because that's when they get irritated. That's when they feel like you're doing some, you know, questionable insurance practices, and they're going to start digging a little deeper. Anytime you have that, it's best just to reach out to them and say, this is what we're dealing with. We're going to get a producer licensed in all 50 states, or, you know, however many, and go about it.
And then the other thing I would add is that in most states where there has been a death of a sole producer, the state will give a license, a temporary license. Yep. And that is the way to process that business. It is not to use the deceased producer's license.
No.
You get a temporary license for the spouse or the estate continuing to file as the poor guy who's passed on is fraud.
Oh,
so get the temporary license. I've seen that happen too many times.
Yes.
And there are methods, there are procedures that allow you to do that. It's some paperwork, but it's permissible and will keep you
out of trouble.
And that does apply to all lines of authority. So I see Tisha's question. That is for all lines of authority.
Mm-hmm. We didn't have any interest in the temporary license. In this case, we did have the licensee was licensed in their resident state, so they were able just to go and submit the licenses in the non-resident states. But the temporary license is available in most states in most cases when you're dealing with something unforeseen, unfortunate.
Hey, I'm just going to pause for 1 second. I would love for Christian, if you could please share. We have a lot of podcasts. By the way, Ted and I are co-hosts of a podcast, which is Spot On Insurance. And we have a lot of episodes that are centered around compliance. So I just want to show you where they are. So we have regular podcast episodes, and then we have the compliance do's and don'ts. We've covered just about every topic that has to do with compliance tasks. So, you know, feel free to check those out, share it with people that are in a compliance role that might be able to really benefit from this. We also have like little promos at the very beginning that'll show you like all the different types of episodes that we've covered. We have a lot of fun doing it. Check them out. You'll get to know a whole lot more about myself and Ted in these podcasts.
More than you need to know.
Things that I always tend to forget that we've said on these podcasts. So make sure you check them out, and definitely, you know, the compliance ones. We have career advancement episodes. So they're very valuable for folks in our industry.
Yeah, we have over 160 episodes, and we do tend to look into all areas of insurance, just to give you a good overview of what's going on in the industry. And a lot of great stories in there.
Thank you, Christian. Kelsey, you have more questions that have come in?
Yes. The next one is, if my resident state is a state that doesn't track affiliations, are affiliations still required in the non-resident states where I hold a license? You're muted, Kristy.
Kristy, you're muted. Caught you.
I think Joanne wants to jump in.
Quick response, yes. Could be.
Joanne,
You're not going to expand on that?
The only thing, I'm seconding Kristy's motion. Just keep in mind that your non-resident licenses, you have to follow the laws in each individual state. So
Yep.
it's not based on your resident state. Every state has its own licensing, affiliation, bonding. Everything is different, but it is by state.
Oh, by the way, guys, this is like our 4th or 5th compliance conversation. You can find the reruns on YouTube, on the Spot on Insurance YouTube channel. And we've covered a lot of different areas of insurance, and we're getting a lot of feedback from people who, if they miss it here, are catching it there and are learning tremendous amount about the insurance industry and what's going on with compliance.
And next week, we have these every Thursday, but next week it's actually going to be done on a Wednesday. And we will have one of our guest panelists will be from Elaney from the Excess Line Association of New York, and he can only come on a Wednesday. So we're going to be talking all surplus line stuff. And I think, are we covering export lists? I don't remember exactly the topic, but it's going to be surplus lines. So it's going to be fun stuff for us. So that's going to be next Wednesday, June 3rd.
And
Kelsey?
Kelsey, any other questions? We're coming up on 2 minutes.
Kristy, cover some stuff on license cancellation, some big do's and don'ts.
2, cancel your license. Don't wait. If you have a surplus lines license, cancel it immediately so you don't incur quarterly, semi-quarterly, annual, whatever surplus lines filings that are a compliance if those licenses stay active.
Actually, I want to bring Joanne into this just because Kristy's bread and butter in her life is licensing, but let's go into surplus lines, Joanne. Is that the right move if you still have quarterlies that have to be done? Can you go ahead and
Yep, and that is where I would agree with Kristy. If you are not writing the business, you want to cancel the license regardless. So if you cancel your license after January 1st on a surplus line basis, you will in the following year still have to file any of the periodic or annual returns that are due.
So let's say it's today, May 28th, and I want to cancel that license, but I've already written business that I'm going to have to submit reports later on. Is it okay that I cancel that license today?
In most states, you can go ahead and cancel that license, and that will require you to do whatever reports are due through the cancellation date. Meaning if there is a second quarter return and it's due in July, even if you canceled your license in May, you would file that July report. But you might not have to file the third and fourth quarter if it's a quarterly state. And your next return or your final return would be, in some cases, the quarterly, in other cases, a final annual that says final return clearly printed across the top.
Yeah, the thing is, as soon as you stop doing business and you cancel that license, you don't do any business. Oh, well, I just canceled that license. Let me write this business now. That, 2 or 3 weeks later, you can't do that. That's a no-no.
We know that.
Just quit your license. Don't do any more business. Tell them no.
Done means done.
Done means done, exactly.
Well, as we promised everyone, the hour is up. And guys, thank you all for attending. Jeff, Joanne, always a pleasure to have you come and join us. Jeff, welcome to join us at any time. We'll be sure to send, we're trying to get as many people from the different departments of insurance across the U.S. as possible. This continues to grow and mature, and we hope that it really becomes a good reference point for people out there in the industry in ways to help you guys keep people doing the right thing.
Before I forget, one of the things, guys, is that we're kind of like doing a manual process of reaching out to people and inviting them. So we run different filters every week. If you want to be invited every week, please send us an email saying, keep us on your list all the time. Because sometimes we're just reaching out to people that are in surplus lines. Sometimes we're just reaching out to compliance folks on the Secretary of State side. So if you want to be receiving the invites, it's not that we forgot or whatever, it's just that we're only sending it to certain folks each week. So please send us an email. You can send it to the CC questions, or you could also send it at the Spot On Insurance email. Just tell us, hey, please send me the invite for the webinar every week.
The other thing is, if you do need any help in compliance, just call us. Our compliance team is always ready to help you. They're at 254-729-8002. And hey, questions are free. You can call in and just as many questions as you want, whatever it is that's troubling you, they can help you.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you next week, because I love seeing people. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Have a great rest of the week.
That was awesome, guys. That was awesome.